Welcome back. This is the part 3 of our IGCSE Geography Past Paper series. And today, we're diving into river systems, exploring some key concepts and exam style questions to help you ace this topic. So let's get started. Study the figures 4.2 and 4.3, the two insert photographs of different rivers in Scotland and the UK, and then describe the three differences between the natural characteristics of the rivers shown in figures 4.2 and 4.3. So, to understand the question, you have to understand first the photos. So, there are two photos, and all you need to do is to describe them. Okay, so we will start with figure 4.2, which is obviously the first stage of the river, also known as the upper course, because there are distinctive characteristics because of its nature and location, closer to the source of the river. Again, so the first photo is the first stage of a river, also known as the upper course, and there are many features in the upper course. First is the narrow and shallow channel, meaning to say that the river channel in the upper course is typically normally narrow and shallow. Why? It's because the river is still in the early stages of development. So again, so if you can see this kind of photo, this is part of the upper course, and the distinctive, okay, of the very unique characteristic, it's usually narrow and shallow because the river is still in the early stage or part of the development. So it hasn't had enough time to widen or deepen its channel significantly. So the limited water flow combined with a steep gradient, it really results into less erosion at this stage. Again, in this upper course, there is less erosion at this stage. Why? Because there's a limit of the water flow. That's why it becomes, it contributes to the narrow and shallow channel. So again, the first feature is narrow and shallow channel. The second characteristic of this photo is the lower or the water discharge. Why? When we say discharge, we mean that it's a volume of water flowing in the river. Okay, this is the geographical term. Discharge is the volume of water flowing in the river at any given point. So in the upper course in figure 4.2, the water discharge is relatively low because number one, the river has not yet been joined by many tributaries. So if you have, if the tributaries are joining together, of course, there will be an increase of the water volume. But in this figure, okay, this kind of river has not yet been joined by many tributaries. The second is why the discharge is low. It's because the water may ill infiltrate into the ground, okay, or possibly use for the vegetation. That's why there's a reduction of the amount entering the river. Meaning to say, um, some people might use the water for the vegetation for farming, okay, and obviously there's an infiltration into the ground. So again, so in figure 4.2, it means that it has a low water discharge. That's the second characteristic. The third characteristic, it's really obvious, it's that there are large rocks in the channel. So it means that the river bed in the upper course in figure 4.2 is often littered with huge or large rocks and boulders. So these rocks are really derived from weathering and erosion of the surrounding landscape. Again, Remember the weathering and erosion, this is not part of the hydrological cycle, but they are all included in the geographical geographical processes. So it geophysical processes. So meaning to say that this river, okay, lacks the energy to carry these huge materials, these huge rocks, far from the downstream. So that's why they remain in the channel. Again, the riverbed in the upper course is has lots of rocks and boulders because the river lacks the energy, the water energy to carry these large materials far from the downstream. So that's the third characteristic. The fourth characteristic is steep gradient and waterfalls. So the upper course, the figure 4.2, is really characterized by a steep gradient, meaning to say it's closer to the mountains. Okay, so this kind of river is really closer to the mountains or any elevated areas where the river begins, and these steepness really result in the formation of waterfalls and rapids where the water plunges or flows turbulently over sudden drops of elevation. So again, so it means that figure 4.2, the upper course of the river, expect that it's really steep and there will be the formation of the waterfalls. And the fifth characteristic is there's a slower flowing water. Okay, so while the steep gradient, you might think that it has a faster flow, but then again, the presence of the obstacles such as rocks, okay, and even other terrains, it really disrupts the flow. Okay, it will these big rocks, even though there's a steep, it's really steep. Um, if there's a steep gradient, you might think that the water will flow faster. No, why? Because there's a presence of the rocks. So these huge rocks can disrupt the flow. So the river speed will slower overall. The last characteristic of the figure 4.2 is the turbulent flow. So the river flow in the upper course is usually turbulent. Turbulent meaning to say that the water really moves chaotically. Okay, the river has this swirling motions, very not fast, but you can see that it's really chaotic. Why there's a turbulence? It's because it's caused by the steep gradient, and also there's a rough and uneven riverbed with large rocks and boulders. So this turbulent flow can result into a vertical erosion, okay, the downward cutting, which really deepens the river channel over time. So if you're going to summarize the characteristics of figure 4.2, you would see that it's so obvious that this part is an upper course. This is the upper course of the river. It has a narrow and shallow channel. It has a low water discharge. There are large rocks in the channel. Um, the river is very steep. There's a steep gradient and there might be waterfalls. This river has a slower flowing water and it has a turbulent flow. How about the figure 4.3? Okay, the second photograph of the river in Scotland and UK is actually the second stage of a river, often referred to the middle course. This is the middle part of the river. Why? Because there are many characteristics and really obvious characteristics. The first characteristic is having a wide and shallow channel. So the river widens in this stage because of the increased erosion. Okay, the side to side erosion as the gradient becomes really less steep. So it's not anymore in the mountainside. Okay. And while the channel is really wide, it remains shallow compared to the lower course. So the second characteristic of this river is the higher water discharge. So earlier you've learned about discharge, right? The volume of the water. So this kind of river, part of the river is that the water discharge increases. Why? Because the river has been joined by more tributaries. So the more tributaries join it together, it will contribute a larger volume of water flowing in the channel. And also the river drains in a larger area by this stage, in the middle stage. So it further enhances the discharge levels. Comparing in the 4.2, the other picture, this one has a larger volume of water. The third characteristic is it has a flat or gentle gradient, because the slope of the riverbed becomes less steep in the middle course. So it creates really a gentler gradient. So this change really decreases the river's ability to erode vertically and changes focus to the other erosion, which, you know, shaping the features like meander. So again, in the first photo, it has lots of erosion because it's in the mountainside, but in the second photo, there is the erosion vertically has a reduction, but then again there's still the erosion, um but then on the side, okay, and it creates a meander or another landform. Then the fourth characteristic is it has a faster flowing water. Why? Because there's a less friction. Remember earlier, there's a slow flowing of water in picture on the photo, the first photo, because of the rocks, okay, but because there are less rocks, the big rocks, so it means that there's a less friction, there are less obstacles, so the water flows faster compared to the upper course. And there's the increase of discharge, which adds the momentum and the speed of the river's flow. So again, less rocks, less boulders. It means less friction. Less friction means faster flowing water. Another is the flow of the river. It has a smooth flow in this stage and more uniform because of the reduction of turbulence. Okay, the flow is not turbulent, and there's a smoother riverbed. So it really create a steady movement. So it makes the transportation of all the sediments more efficient, and the finer particles are carried downstream. Okay, so this stage really highlights the river's transition as it moves closer to the lower course, where, of course, there are more significant changes occur. So to answer the IGCSE question, describe the three differences between the natural characteristics of the rivers shown in figures 4.2, 4.3. You can emphasize, point out the width of the river channel. So the first river is narrow, while the other one is wide. You can also include that this part of the river is the upper course and the other one is in the middle course. The second characteristic that you can differentiate is the flow speed and pattern. So the first river flows really slower, but it has really a turbulent flow, okay? But the river number 2 flows faster with a smooth flow. And the third is the water discharge and the gradient. So river 1 has low water discharge because it has a steep gradient. Always remember it's near the mountainside. It's near the source of the river, so expect that there's a steep gradient. On the other hand, um, the river number two has a higher water discharge and it has a flat, gentle gradient. Meaning to say that that there are less rocks because huge rocks are located on the first river or the first part of the river.